Hello there, this is Tony Wright, FLCCAB Wright Ministries. This is day number 38 of our 90-day Bible study. We're in the book of Job, 25th chapter. We'll be going through the 41st chapter. And yeah, we've been tracking the back and forth between Job and his friends, Bildad, Zophar, Eliphaz. And Job has told him that he should have the opportunity to argue his case before God. This dude wants to take on God. What in the world? Boy, that would be a loser. Are you kidding me? Yeah, but guess what? Job, he knows that it's a loser too. But he doesn't care. He feels like that's his only choice. The only other option is to say that he's suffering because he's done wrong. And Job is standing by his conviction that he has not, right? So as hard as his friends are pushing him to just accept that he's being punished for, his wickedness and just take his lumps, Job is saying that he's already taken lumps anyway. But he is not going to say that he's done anything wicked. So he has to be getting punished for other causes. And those causes are just unknown to him. And God owes him the reason. Boy, this joke is brave, isn't he? Or stupid. But anyway, he's just not giving up. And he's not turned against God. Now, when you read some of what he's saying, it kind of makes you wonder if he hasn't given up on God. I mean, where is this stuff coming from? But then you realize that Job is really saying that he knows God. But the God that he knows wouldn't condemn a man that's innocent. And like almost everybody that's in jail, Job said that he is innocent. So why in the world is he condemned and being punished? What's the offense? So Job is hearing what his friends are saying, but it's just not making a convincing case to him because it's all based on or built on or premised on his guilt. And when Job hears Bildad describe him as a worm, he knows that his friend has nothing to say to him that he doesn't already know. Job, he doesn't need this friend to confirm that as he stands right now in his life, he's a little more than food for worms. So Job hits Bildad with a series of questions. Bildad, he asked Bildad about the source of his so-called wisdom. Who did he get these words from? Whose breath or whose spirit inspires him to speak like this? Now we can assume that if given a chance, Bildad would probably say that his words and his inspiration comes from God. And Job, he rejects Bildad's words as uninspired and baseless. Now Bildad, had began his wise counsel by focusing on the dominion and fear that God imposes on everything under his care. Job has heard this speech before, though. Even Eliphaz had made basically this same argument. So, and the arguments, all of them seem to end with some kind of conviction that mankind is so far beneath God. And in their presentations of the hierarchy of God's creation, human beings, they rank somewhere down near worm. And time after time, they make it a point to let Job know. So by now, Job is probably right to assess that he knows exactly where Bildad is planning to take this discussion when he moves to words like dominion and fear. Eliphaz had previously rebuked Job for, Job presuming that he knows anything about the boundaries that God has placed on creation, or that he has any say-so about how God administers those boundaries. Now, Job, he asks, are you the firstborn of the human race? Were you created before the hills? Have you listened in on the assemblies of God? Now, like Eliphaz, Bildad, it's certain that the only real response that Job can make to such questions is no. Now, maybe by affirming, though, that there are indeed boundaries, such as those between light and darkness, Job, he's moved just a little step closer to conceding the truth of his friend's arguments. And maybe just a little step closer to offering the praise that his friends insist that he offers. But for Job, there's just no value in arguments about where he was during creation or where he was when major components of the natural order were put in place. And Job pays them very little of his attention here. So it's not until God's voice thunders out of the whirlwind with very similar questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Not until then that Job finally considered that there was any reason, even any reason, to think that the question of his place in the world was not just important for Job's understanding, but that it might also be important to God. So where Job's discernment had failed him, though, was in this understanding of the ways of God. But he argues that that's due more to God's inexplicable secrecy than it is to any limits of understanding on Job's part. So Job, he knows things about himself, and even some of the things of the hidden things of God. But this knowledge, though, just leads him to more questions and very few answers. And Job, he sees the problem he sees as the problem that there is often a tragic difference between what God sees and what humans see. Now, Job presents his reflections on God and wisdom, and then he shifts his focus from God's powers as creator to God's use of those powers by pointing out 4 particular acts of the creation. He said that God made the wind and assigned its proper weight in the balance of the earth's natural forces. He also said that God made the primal waters, and he carefully measured their content in the world. And that God had made the rain and then determined the amount of water that was to fall from the sky each time that it did rain. And finally, he said that God had made the thunderbolt and then charted the path for these thunderbolts to travel across the sky. So he asked, where then shall wisdom be found? And how can it be obtained? Well, Job appears, though, to have reached some conclusion on an answer to those questions. He's arrived at a simple answer, that wisdom is equated with the fear of the Lord. And the fundamental requirement for that is the ability to depart from evil. And Job is convinced that he meets those qualifications. In fact, as the book of Job opens up, it's told to us that God-fearing and turning away from evil were qualities that Job pretty much exemplified. But that was before he fell into this quagmire of protests and questions. So throughout the rounds of dialogue, Job has fervently insisted that he has a right to question and protest, even if it means that he risks a confrontation with God. Huh, poor Job. Now, God directs Job's attention to nature and to the beginning. And God walked him through the events of creation and the question of where Mr. Job was when God went through the actions of creation. Then God summons Job to respond. And he addresses Job with language that Job himself had used. So for all their differences and all of their difference of perspective, they both share at least some common understanding. But remember, Job wanted to present a case against God. And God now is addressing him. Now, this bold individual that had dared to challenge God, you kidding me? So Job's initial response is basically, oh, I am small. Notice this joker still didn't say, I have seen him, which is, of course, what his friends have demanded that he do. And along with his word, Job placed his hands over his mouth, which portrayed that he was shamed for even having acted as he's been acting in the presence of an almighty God. Now, he said some pretty daring things, but now he's not daring, he's silent. So with a series of rhetorical questions, God invites Job to understand that the kind of justice on which the world relies requires godlike power, godlike word, godlike majesty, godlike dignity, and godlike glory. And it requires righteous anger, the kind that God shows when he takes down the proud and the wicked, or those who think they can abuse others without penalty. Now, Job, his suffering has forced him to conclude that if God has chosen him for this special attention, it's only because God has put him in a better position for destruction. God's challenge puts the psalmist's words before Job one more time. And this time with the obviously rhetorical questions. Have you an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? And now God gives Job a directive. Deck yourself with majesty and dignity. Clothe yourself with glory and splendor. And God goes on to define his superiority to mankind and how man is not even prepared to challenge God on any level as a creator. And God not only knows his creation, but just like God has over all the rest of his creation, God has total control over mankind as well. And mankind's capabilities go only as far as God allows them to go. Indeed, God told Job in this closing portion of today's reading, upon the earth there is none like him, and he beholds all things. And I think that Job has finally been shaken out of his state of self-absorption with whether he's right or wrong. And now the only thing that matters is that he's not in control, but God is. And just as God has observed that Job has been afflicted, not only can God change his circumstances, but God can turn them completely around. And based on where this story started, we don't know if Job was quite as outspoken and prolific in his praise of God. That God had blessed him with all the wealth and his family and the health. But if not, that wouldn't make him much different than many of us. So, like Job, we just have to know that the same God is there, regardless of what our circumstances are. God, he does not change. And speaking of the same, we'll be at the same thing again tomorrow. So you keep reading this word and keep checking us out on social media. And keep reaching out to tell your friends, tell your neighbors that FLCC is on the move. And we're taking ministry back to the first love. Peace.